Hello students, I am Dr. Prerna Bhasin, Consultant Anthropologist and Director, Inspire Analytics. Today I am going to discuss a module on relevance of rapport establishment from the paper Research Methods and Fieldwork. Let's understand what we are going to learn today. In order to do that, in order to read this module, you should be able to comprehend the following points, like what exactly is rapport establishment? What is the historical background of rapport establishment, the rapport building, and why is it relevant to anthropological work and the field work? Some of the empirical experience in rapport establishment or rapport building will also be discussed. Let's talk about the introduction. What is rapport establishment? Rapporteur is an old French word and it literally means to bring back. Anthropological study, be it biological, physical, social, cultural, or prehistoric archaeology, fieldwork is known to be a hallmark in any and all of these studies. Rapport building is one of the important processes in the fieldwork through which anthropologists gain access to the community or tribe and is able to bring back data. The aim of rapport is to create a harmonious and friendly relationship with people. Creating rapport helps in building trust, belief, and confidence among two or more people. This module will take you through the history of rapport establishment and how it started, when it started, why is it relevant in anthropological fieldwork. It would also emphasize on the relevance of rapport establishment in the fieldwork. Empirical experiences from the field have been shared in this module to elucidate the different processes anthropologists use to build this rapport with the people during fieldwork. This module also takes into account the challenges of rapport establishment outside the trodden path of fieldwork among a particular community or a tribe by a particular person or a researcher. A few narrations of women anthropologists and their experiences in terms of rapport building is also a part of this module. Let's start with discussing the relevance of rapport building and reflections on empirical experiences. The study of the other has been the focus of anthropology since its inception. Early anthropologists, popularly known as the armchair anthropologists, had collected and compiled data based on the facts recorded in the logbooks of travelers and the stories the missionaries brought back from the far, far lands. Sir James George Fraser's volume of The Golden Bough in 1922 is one such collection on religion based on the notes from the travelers. The later anthropologists started criticizing this methodology as they emphasized on the first-hand data collected through the direct contact with the people under the study. This was the phase of expeditions that was carried out by anthropologists like C.G. Schlegman, W.H. Rivers, and others. The tradition of intensive fieldwork is involving the active participation of the field worker in the day-to-day lives of the people and is reckoned with Bronsleigh Malinowski's work on the Trobriand Islanders. Malinowski had spent 38 months in the island observing and participating in the village activities. This later came to be known as the participant observation, a technique very well known for conducting fieldwork. With the introduction of the fieldwork in anthropology, rapport establishment became an integral part of the process. A fieldworker going to an unknown place had to establish a way of communication and trust while living among strangers and studying their lives and culture. Rapport building paves the way for the field worker to communicate with the people under the study. What is the relevance of rapport building? Why do we actually need it? Before embarking onto the field work, the undergraduate and postgraduate students of anthropology discipline are initiated on the ways of conducting this field work through induction sessions. The students are advised about their conduct in the field. The question herein is why there is emphasis on rapport establishment or rapport building. rapport building is important to connect with the people we are going to study. If there is no mutual understanding and trust, the process of data collection would be difficult. As such, the emphasis is primarily on the dress, the food, and the behavior of the researcher so that one can connect with the people. For example, if in a village people strictly follow norms of behavior, dress code, etc., and we go and visit them in a dress that might be considered inappropriate by their standards, or we go to a village and ask villagers to just extend their fingers and we prick them to collect blood samples. Do you even think what can be the consequences of such an act? Under such circumstances, we might have to face hostile behavior from the villagers, dwellers towards our visit. Such an atmosphere is not congenial for data collection and might not serve the purpose of our visit. Thus, the dictum followed is extending a warm and friendly gesture to all our respondents and always respect their culture. So how do we go about it? How do we even get there? Start with greetings. Greetings are considered to be appropriate icebreakers. Every student is encouraged to greet the people in local language when in the field. As stated earlier, in a field situation, the field worker has to connect with the people, and thus students are always advised to read about the people and their culture before initiating fieldwork. The students are encouraged to wear simple clothes so that the people reckon them as one amongst themselves and not as an outsider, and to accept food and drink courteously whenever offered. In many cultures, it's often considered rude behavior to refuse offerings of the food. It might also reflect that their hospitality is not being accepted and respected. The basic rule of fieldwork is to go with an open mind and do away with ethnocentric thoughts and behaviors, as one is primarily trying to understand the culture and the people or a situation. A researcher has to be prepared for unfavorable circumstances but try the very best in building a rapport. Let's understand how these reflect on our empirical experiences. The fact still remains that no class can prepare a field worker to the kind of field situation one might face or is about to face. Every field is unique in it itself, as there are no clear-cut methods available on how to build rapport here. In this section, we would discuss experiences of some of the anthropologists in the field to understand the different situations they faced during the rapport building process. It is also important to note that a process that had worked for one researcher might not work for another. Presentation of the self in the field is one important aspect that every researcher needs to take care about. How a researcher presents oneself in the field goes a long way in rapport establishment. At the outset, a researcher has to make the intention of the research work explicitly clear to the community, the organization, the institution, whichever is under study. Many a times when working in rural areas or villages, the researcher might be mistaken for an official representing the government, leading to build up expectations on the part of the community. Such misunderstandings need to be clarified immediately, as it might lead to negative repercussions in the later course of the field study. How do you dress? The food, the drink, and the behavior is yet another aspect that needs to be taken care about. While preparing for the fieldwork, a researcher has to comprehend that while the researcher studies community, the community is also studying the researcher. How the researcher dresses, interacts with the people of different age groups and gender, reacts to the offering of foods and drinks, etc., is being constantly scrutinized by the people under the study. It's like having guests over at the house. You are being scrutinized and so are they. The researcher's behavior in the field also decides the rapport building process. At times, the community has a specific preconceived image of the researcher. Anthropologists in the field many a times have to act and behave in the manner the field perceives. In this connection, Middleton once wrote that during his study at the Lagbara, who addresses him as our European, expected him to be dressed, behave and act like European at all times. They expected him to treat them with European norms of hospitality whenever they visited their place. Srinivas, on the other hand, wrote that during his fieldwork in a village in Karnataka, India, there was no privacy to his life. Being an unmarried young man, he was constantly being questioned by villagers as to the reasons of his bachelorhood, as most men in the village of his age had a couple of children. The headman of the village constantly monitored his behavior and even pointed out personal details like a man should shave and admonished Srinivas for shaving after having a bath. Srinivas had to conform to the purity and pollution aspects observed by the village folks. Goldie, speaking about his fieldwork in a Mexican village, stated that being an unmarried girl, the villagers felt that she should adhere to certain norms like not smoking, drinking, going out alone at night, speaking openly about topics like sex, pregnancy, entertain any male in the house except in the presence of some village elders, etc. Moreover, when she stated wearing clothes like the womenfolk of the village as a part of rapport building, she started receiving many proposals for marriage, including a marriage proposal to be the second wife. Therefore, it is seen that different field situations have different standards for researchers. In one situation, we see that the people expected Middleton, the researcher, to be his natural self, while in case of Srinivas and Goldie, the villagers expected them to follow the norms of the village. In case of Goldie, a female field worker, the villagers expected her to follow norms and behave in a fashion which they deemed fit for an unmarried woman. Let's talk about social drinking. So, we've often heard about this saying, when in Rome, behave like a Roman. Most times, as an anthropologist, to establish a bond with the local, tries to inculcate habits that become a part of their routine. Men, it is believed, bond easily while drinking, and many anthropologists have tried this route. On the experience of drinking to be accepted as among them, Gutman stated that he took part in an afternoon drinking binge and faced varied reactions from the locals. Some admonished him, stated he should have known better than to join such a drinking session, while others made fun of him and would tease him with sayings like, "Hey mate, you want some anise?" for days to come. Thus, it became a running gag for him. Language and interpreters are yet another aspect that need to be taken care of when you're preparing for the field and rapport establishment. Understanding and being able to communicate in the language spoken by the people under the study goes a long way in building a good rapport. A field worker well versed in the language of the people would be able to communicate better. It also does away with misinterpretations in communications that would come away in field studies. However, there are instances also where the help of the interpreters were taken by anthropologists in the field. Selecting the right interpreter also has a strong role to play in rapport building. For instance, Wiedemann in 1970, working in a Burmese village among Buddhist population, writes that she had hired an interpreter who was interested more in promoting her own religion and inflicting on the people the superiority of her own belief system rather than taking notes on the beliefs of the Buddhist way of life. The villagers were irked by the attitude of the interpreter, and to maintain harmonious relationship in the village, Wiedemann had to do away with the service of the interpreter. The next section deals with the ethics. A good anthropologist leaves a valuable impact on the field in the terms of rapport establishment and goes a long way in creating an amicable field ambience for other anthropologists to visit the field in the future. Srivastava in 2015 describes that Raghu, the interpreter who had worked with Elwin during his fieldwork among the Begas in 1939, and along with Srivastava in 1987 used to speak about Elwin's devotion and dedication to the field. Yet there were instances where exoticization had overshadowed Elwin's work, putting anthropological honesty at stake. Srivastava further states that Raghu's name was never mentioned anywhere in Elwin's work. It is of immense importance that a researcher does not lose the real essence of fieldwork and also acknowledge the help that comes from all quarters. In a field situation, the question of paying respondents keeps coming up. The request for liquor, tobacco, small gifts like bangles, earrings, etc., and even cash in exchange for information is always there. One can always give in to these demands as a part of rapport building process. Yet, the question still remains as to how far is it justifiable to offer gifts to gain friendship and access to information. In terms of paying cash to respondents, Das and Parry has written critically on the issue and argued that by such behavior, the field is spoiled for other researchers who might be working on a shoestring budget to conduct what Srivastava had termed as a peaceful fieldwork. The authenticity of data based on gifts and payments might put everything at stake. The respondents might manipulate data for greed. It is now time to speak about the anthropological journey beyond the exotic and women and the field. Anthropological journey, the tradition of fieldwork in anthropology, has come a long way since Malinowski's work among the Trobriand Islanders. Malinowski had stated that one of the proper conditions of ethnographic work is that one has to cut oneself off from the company of other white men and remain in as close contact with the natives as possible, which can really be achieved by camping right in their villages. Today, the very concept of field has undergone a tremendous change. Field no longer means going to an exotic, far-off place. The field today is an anthropological parlance and can be an organization, an institution, a rural or an urban site, or working amongst one's own people, not to forget the recent trends of multi-site fieldwork. In this section, experience of anthropologists would be shared on their rapport establishment process who have taken up fieldwork outside the trodden path of studying the exotic. Some have been working in an institute or organization. Rapport building is a challenging task in an institution or organization. Here, there are always two fractions, the management and the worker. Normally, entry into such places by researchers taught through the management, and thus many a times workers feel it is difficult to accept the researcher in his or her own right. Researcher is more or less considered an informer of the management. In such a situation, rapport building becomes very, very crucial. Research in one's own community is yet another thing that's coming up. Many might believe that it is easier to study one's own community. The first presumption is that being an insider, rapport building is a very simple task. But the question arises as to how much an insider is being considered to be one amongst that of the community. The other question that you need to understand is about the multi-site fieldwork. The process of rapport building in itself is a tedious process, as many a times it is really difficult to understand, respect and comes in terms with each other's culture. In this case of multi-site fieldwork, where the researcher is working gathering data for more than one site, the task of rapport building becomes even more challenging in such situations. Only the word of mouth helps, like one person telling the other as to what's going on. Women in the field of anthropology and fieldwork. Entry into this new territory has never been easy. During the initial days of fieldwork, despite introductions and necessary letters from competent authorities, the researcher had to face suspicion and is treated as an intruder. In the case of female field workers, the task of working among strangers, living among them, to work in a community with conceived sets of rules, organized relationships and defined roles, the challenges are many. Wiedemann stated that her fieldwork in Burma in year 1957 had many challenges. During that time, Burma was going through a political turmoil leading to unrest in the society, with kidnapping and murders becoming an everyday affair. She was unable to locate a village where she could start her fieldwork, and her acquaintances were reluctant to take responsibility. As first and foremost, she was a woman and who was single. Single women did not live alone within the city, let alone outside Rangoon in a poor little farming village, Wiedemann once quoted. Her single status did not conform to the norms of the society and was considered not appropriate. The utmost consideration was her safety, as many feared that she was a foreigner. She might be kidnapped, murdered, or taken as a wife by one of the rebel leaders. Least was the concern for her work. Wiedemann, after many futile attempts, was able to find a village best suited for her work. Times were tough, and at one point she was asked by the authorities to leave the village when the headman was kidnapped. But the headman escaped and returned to the village. Almost a month later, Wiedemann was allowed to return to the village. This was a turning point, as the villagers accepted her, as she was ready to continue with her work despite difficult times. It is time to summarize this module. There is no concrete methodology of rapport establishment. The same field can be predictably unpredictable, says Channa, as in her book in 2015. Every day in the field is a new day. The approach that has yielded data today might not yield data anything tomorrow. Field situations are challenging in itself, as the respondents may not belong to the same strata or community or group. It is a process that one develops in the field. The process of rapport building is continuous. Rapport building is a two-way process. In the field, the researcher is not the only one collecting data, like as it has been told. The people under the study are also observing the researcher continuously. The researcher might be questioned on the marital status, caste, and family history. A field worker has to be prepared for all these questions, the situations, and queries. All times, and mostly at times, the researcher might face emotional situations beyond the control of any textbook example. At such times, the researcher has to react with caution and the understanding of the situation. Above all, the researcher needs to be always focused and keep in mind the objective of the fieldwork. A field worker has to be observant and sensitive to the moods of the people. One cannot force the subjects to respond or provide data. It is an everyday life experience, and it is an everyday lived experience as well. Rapport building is the process that paves the way for the researcher to become a part of the people that are being studied. Thank you.